Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the editorial director with Data Science Central and also the chief data scientist for Data Magnum. I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Alteryx for sponsoring today's event. Alteryx is an integral supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including IBM, Tableau, Teradata, Dell Statistica, Anodot, and Exaptive, to name just a few. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com. If you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. So today's webinar is entitled Optimizing Analytical Insights, Data Security, and Visualization. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's webinar will be an hour long. We'll have two presenters that I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation, and this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. So I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. So I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Brian Durking of Alteryx and Erik Miller of Western Union. Now, Brian Durking is Director of Product Marketing at Alteryx. He's been in the high-tech industry for more than 15 years, holds product management, business development, and product marketing roles at Stellent, Oracle, and Box. And at Alteryx, Brian is responsible for go-to-market strategy, planning, and execution on partner and big data programs. Now, Erik Miller is the Senior Systems Engineer of Cybersecurity Analytics at Western Union. So in this role, Erik is tasked with building out a strategic program geared at analyzing the security measures implemented at Western Union. Erik has over 16 years of experience in the analytic world, ranging from cybersecurity to sales compensation and operations. So Brian, Erik, thanks for being with us today. So how do you gain visibility and insight from all your data when you're faced with analyzing over 4 million records per month from 5 different systems? Join us for this latest Data Science Central webinar and learn how Erik Miller was tasked with analyzing Western Union's information security measures and visualizing that data in Tableau. Challenged with over 500,000 locations and high volumes of data in Excel, Access, MySQL, and more, the process initially took over 100 hours per month. So Erik will show how he turned a 100-hour process into a 5-minute process, while also seamlessly integrating 36 disparate data sources into Tableau, allowing him to tell a story with all available data, gaining analytical insight into risks posed by malicious insiders, hackers, and uninformed users, and building out a flexible and modular analytics program for quicker insight. So Brian, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for your time today. And I wanted to take a minute just to briefly explain what Alteryx is, as Erik will be talking about Alteryx, and wanted to get those of us who aren't familiar with it up to speed. But Alteryx is a leading platform for self-service data analytics. And Alteryx really started out as a analytics platform. And so what you see is the ability to do predictive analytics and spatial analytics in a drag and drop way with no coding that analysts love. But in order to get the data into an analytics engine, you have to get the data prepared and blended. You need to get it cleaned up. And so Alteryx has also gotten really good at being able to prepare your data and get your data into the engine. And so that's really why we've become a leading platform for self-service data analytics, is that ability to get the data just right, as Bill mentioned, as many as 20 or 30 different sources of data, and then be able to bring that data together and be able to apply the analytics, and then to be able to deploy and share those analytics. And so One of the beauties of Alteryx is once you've built a workflow to do exactly what you want to do with the data, then you can automate that process. You can schedule it, or you can just once a day go and press the green button, or as often as you like, to update your data, and that data gets updated, in Tableau or wherever else you're planning to consume the data. So the overall benefit there is that you're able to deliver deeper insights in hours and not weeks, and we see this all the time for our customers, where they're able to say, I had a process that used to take me weeks, and now I'm doing it in hours or even minutes, and that's really what people love about Alteryx. So if I show on this slide, very quickly, there's a little bit of an animation here, which I'll just build out. But Alteryx lets you take all of your different data sources, whether they're cloud-based applications or databases that are in-house, applications like Excel that are on your desktop, Hadoop systems, etc. Take all that data, bring it in, and put together a workflow. And you can see a screenshot in the lower part of the slide here, where you can build this workflow that actually shows you what's happening to your data at each step of the way, which makes this very auditable and very easy to go back and share with other folks, and other people can then pick up your work. So that's a nice thing about Alteryx, is that ability to have teams work on things and be able to share the work around, and then also reuse that work. If I build something really great, I can share that and other people can use it in their workflows, or I can even centralize it and have other people refer to it. With the green arrow, you can see that we can enrich data. So if you get the Alteryx with Data package, it includes data from Experian, TomTom, Dun & Bradstreet, and census data, so you can enrich your data doing things like segmentation of your audiences. And then we do the analysis, and I mentioned the ability to do predictive analytics, all based on the R language, and to do geospatial analytics. And all of that is done in a drag-and-drop way, so you don't need to do any coding. You just configure, the analytic models for what it is that you want them to do. And then you're able to share that data and output it for wherever people need to consume that data. So that might be a visualization engine like Tableau. You might need to put it into just simple reports that people can access, or you might even put it back into one of the systems that you originally took the data out of, or into another database or data warehouse. So we'll see a lot of folks who will do a lot of joining of data, and they'll take it from Alteryx and they'll put it in something like Amazon Redshift. And then from Tableau, they'll access it using the connector to Amazon Redshift. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you architect the system and how you are able to take the data and then use it. So that's a quick overview of Alteryx I just wanted to give everyone. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Erik Miller.
Oh, thanks, Brian. I really appreciate that. So my name is Erik Miller, and I'm the Senior Systems Engineer of Cybersecurity Analytics at Western Union, and that really is a mouthful to say. And it really is quite impressive to hear, Bill talk about our program, because it really is kind of humbling to hear that from somebody else's viewpoint. So my responsibility at Western Union is to build out a program that measures risk across Western Union. We basically are taking the concepts that we've had for many years of operational and big data analytics, and really bringing that into the information security world, where it's a relatively new concept. I also run Western Union's governance, risk, and compliance system, which is responsible for keeping track of a lot of the audits that we do on systems and suppliers, and all of our policies and information like that. Our team's actually pretty small. We only have a 3-person team, and that's very much by design. We don't want it to be a large team because of the sensitivity of the data that we work with, and the flexibility that we have in not having a large amount of people and trying to steer that massive ship in a certain direction. In addition to that, I manage the Alteryx server at Western Union, which I'll talk about a little bit. And I work with multiple groups across the organization and even outside of Western Union to help them get their analytic Alteryx processes off the ground. So we'll start with a quick backtrack on where we started from. Back in about a year and a half ago, our team started out as an army of an individual, and that was me. I was approached to run a POC on our agents, which agents are our the locations that you can go into to transact a Western Union money movement item. So if you wanted to send money to somebody across the globe or pay a bill, that would be the place that you would walk into. We had a painful process. It was horrible. I had to use Excel and Access and MySQL and take 36 actual files from 6 different sources. So Netezza, Business Objects, we have a fraud analytics system, of course, and credit risk, and so on and so forth. And we had to combine those together. It was 500,000 agent locations at that time, and of course we continue to grow. 200 locations and 2 million point-of-sale terminals. In addition to that, we have about 13 security measures that we can deploy on any given terminal or on an agent, and so that's a lot of details to kind of pull together. We also took fraud from the last 365 days to kind of put a context around where we needed to deploy things. So 4 million records each month, and 100 hours, obviously, that is unsustainable.
Hey, Erik, what are some of the security measures that you're looking at on the agents, and how do you kind of metricize those?
Right. So I can't get into a lot of detail about those, but we do have things that like keep track of the systems and fingerprint them and keep tabs on where they're located in the world. So that's a couple of examples. But we have a plethora of other things that we're able to deploy to lock down the terminals. So it's really harder for fraudsters to be able to take control of it or see what someone is doing on their terminal. So we have 13 of these different things, and yeah, unfortunately, I can't get into too much detail around those.
No, that's helpful. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So along came Alteryx, and we went from hours to minutes in our process. Our initial focus, of course, was getting that agent program up and running. So that POC that I had been doing that was taking 100 hours every single month, we wanted to see how we could possibly make that a little bit faster. And so I came across Alteryx, and I downloaded the demo and spent about 30 minutes learning the software to understand, how to drag and drop certain things that I needed, understand the tools, and start building something out. So after that point, I realized that I could build out my workflow and spend some time maybe even enhancing it. Didn't know exactly what to expect at that point. I just knew that I understood the software enough to be able to work with it. So over on the right is actually the workflow that I built, and it runs through all 13 of our security measures, all of our fraud for the last 365 days, all of our 500,000 agent locations, all 2 million terminals, and additional information around the individual countries that they work in. And after I built that, I ran it, and it came back with exactly what I had been doing that was taking so long in 5.5 minutes. And so that was a bit of a shock, actually. But it actually made my life a lot easier. But at that point, I was using the files. So the next step was to build the hooks into the services and download the file directly rather than having to go and seek out files and make things work. And so we built hooks into the data services that we needed, into Netezza, into our fraud systems, our SQL systems, and there was no change in time. Actually, it was 5.5 minutes to get it done. It was quite impressive. So before the 14-day trial was even over, I had already made the decision to purchase it and approached my management with that decision, and they were very supportive, and we moved forward with it. So what's kind of cool about it is it actually makes life a lot more flexible. You're able to break down a massive analytics process into bite-sized modules, into groupings of tools and data sets to basically move them around very quickly in and out of a process, or add new items as necessary anywhere in the process. So this is an example. Over on the right, you have what our workflow looks like if you expand in, and you can kind of see the individual areas that we work in. And each one of those is a container of tools. And what that means is you have different things that you can execute within Alteryx, such as pulling your data, running formulas, blending your data together, filtering data out. And each one of those is one of those processes that we built to look at a certain set of data. On the left side is actually what that looks like internally for just one of them. So in this case, what this is doing is pulling in data, running some formulas, sorting the data, blending it with some other information, and spitting it out. And this particular one takes, I think it's, if I'm looking at 2 million records, and blends it to the 500,000 agent locations that we have. And this one runs in about 10 seconds. Here's another example. These are just some examples of what these different modules look like. So in this case, it's running through another one of our risk profiles to come up with a risk score for one of our given security measures that we have.
So Erik, these are processes that everybody has to do, right, with their data, right? You're cleaning it and you're joining it and things like that. And how were you doing this before? Were you doing it in Excel? Were you doing it in SQL? Like, what was your tool of choice?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I actually used Excel when we initially started because I had to look at the data to be able to determine what we needed and what we didn't. And then ultimately, pre-Alteryx, we actually were using MySQL to store a lot of the data, and then writing SQL procedures to weed out some of the data up front, then taking that into Access and blending the different tables together to come up with the actual data set that became the visualization.
Okay. Yeah, I can see where the flexibility really comes in then when you're able to see it all in a drag and drop like this.
Yeah, it actually is really really great, as far as that flexibility goes. And even more so and more important to me was the ability to document what we were doing, because each of the tools already, it tells you a story, and it kind of has its own annotation to it that you can display. And then, of course, with each of the tool containers, the actual gray box that's around these tools right here, that shows me which process I'm looking at initially. So even though I don't have the annotations listed out here, every one of these tools has a definition of what it does, so that when I need to go back and diagnose a problem, it's incredibly easy to do, and I can understand where data is coming from and where it's going to, and how to manipulate it and change the process on the fly. Skip that one. So we have all these different processes. In this case, this is actually outputting multiple files and to different locations. So we output a country file for every single one of our 215 countries that we operate in for the country managers to be able to go in and see how their agents are doing. So we need to do that. We actually have these files export to Tableau and to CSV files and into different databases to keep track of the data and to have it so that we can use it in other processes that we have. And what winds up ultimately happening is that we take all of this great data and we pare it down to really only what we need to do a Tableau visualization and to tell the story of risk within Western Union's agent network. So over on the right is an example of what our risk profiles look like. Not really. I mean, it's fake data, but it gives you an idea of what we put together to be able to tell people where our risk lies. And what this allows them to do is click on any country and we have a lot of people in our operations and sales organizations that use this data, but they're able to click on any country and get the details around where that country lies in relation to every other country within within our network. So if they're higher risk, there's a little bit of a competitive nature there. You can show them, okay, you have a high risk ranking, and your partner right next to you does not. So we provide that capability, and they can drill down from here and look at every single agent within our network to see what risks they pose. Alteryx made all of that possible.
So Erik, how do you feed the Tableau updates? Are you using the TDE file format?
We are, yes. So one of the outputs that we have in that long list of files that I showed before is a TDE file that allows us to update our visualizations. In addition to that, we have data that's going to be used in other visualization software areas in the near future as well.
And are you running Tableau Server?
We do have Tableau Server, yes.
Okay. And so are your TDE files published directly into like a directory where the server is watching, or how do you update Tableau Server?
We actually do it. We have a workbook, a TWBX that we put together to send out to individuals, because not everybody has access to our Tableau Server, but that's certainly something that we're working on and that we think we can make even better in 2017.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So that was our beginnings, but we've come a long way since we did that initial work on that POC. So now we have a full-fledged security program. And one of our current use cases is, of course, data movement. So we have to move data from certain sources into our analytics ocean, I would call it, not really a data lake at this point. But Alteryx allows us to connect into the databases that we need, do any sort of translation that we need to, and move that data into our data lake. We're able to format data through parsing in the middle of this view right here. That green item allows us actually to go in and parse data as it comes into the system. So if there's a field that we need to use regex on, or just divide up, through like a CSV file, this tool allows us to do that really quickly. So we can move from any format into our database pretty seamlessly. And amount, of course, is pretty important. So we deal with a lot of data. Security deals with log files, obviously. We have a lot of that, and ours come in at, the stuff that we're interested in, a rate of about 1,000 lines of data per second. In addition to that, we also capture a lot of information around individuals within the organization to understand the access that they have within systems, and for certain like keys to the kingdom area that we need to be concerned about. We also look at data parsing and structuring, and this is a massive one for us because data doesn't necessarily come in the way you want it to. So our data is, of course, becoming increasingly complex. As we dive more into the security systems, we're seeing lots of different formats, lots of different disparate types of data, and we need to bring that in together. And so the parsing and structuring of that data is important. So as I mentioned before, our log files come in with the data, again, that we're looking at, about 1,000 events per second. We gather a bunch of information around different malware and infections that occur within our walls. So if somebody gets a Trojan on their laptop or something like that, we'll have visibility to that, and we'll pull that data and format it the way that we need it to. We pull identity and access management entitlements. So what this means is if you have access to a system within your company, you're not only given a login to it, you're given a level of entitlement, things that you can do within that system. That information is something that we pull because we want to know what people have access to within the organization. We look at installed applications as well. This is important because if somebody has something installed like peer-to-peer or GitHub or things like that, we want to be aware of that. And we also pull information on our infrastructure, our servers, our data centers, the information that sits out there, the different applications that we have. And what it actually comes down to is Alteryx is helping us take all of this data, all of this unstructured stuff, and make it usable. So I'll give you a few examples. Over here on the right are two examples of what a log file actually looks like. It's very difficult to read. If you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you're going to get lost in it pretty fast. So we take that and we actually make it into simple columns. We break out who the user is that we're looking at, where they went, what they did. All of that information is easily broken out so that we can actually combine that with other information. Right here is an example of a couple of entitlements. So this is, again, pretty difficult to read. Sometimes it's in XML format. Sometimes it's just in a long string. It all depends on the system that's actually generating that information. What I realized really quickly was there are about 30 different formats that can actually exist within that data set. So we use Alteryx to go ahead and connect to that information and then look for the formats that are out there and break it out the way that we need it to. And what that winds up looking like, again, is a simple file. In this case, I just output in a CSV file that basically breaks down the crux of what those different areas are trying to tell us. We use regex for that to look for certain key tags within the massive strings of data and just pull that information out and ignore everything else, all the extra fat that sits around the actual content. Data blending is kind of important, of course, because it's hard to really tell a great story if you're dealing with one set of data. So we need to bring all of that disparate information together. And this is how we do that. Right here is an example of taking two data sets and just parsing them together based on common information in them. So on the left side, you have the two input files. And the first purple icon from the left is actually where we join everything together. And all of that information, all of that great info that resides in two seemingly different areas is brought together just on that single commonality. And it's really easy to do with Alteryx. You're not having to think about, oh, do I need to do a left join, a right join, an inner join? What am I doing? It's really simple. You have just two inputs and three outputs. So if you need your left join, it's right there for you. You need your right join, there you go. So all of that information can easily be worked with and moved around again with those tool sets that they have. So one of the things that we do is take network identities and activity and combine that with HR identities. The reason for this is that we want to look for terminated user credentials that are still being used in our systems. We want to be able to roll up like people to their managers and to their organizations so that we can see if there are outliers. Does somebody have access to a system from one of their previous roles within the organization that maybe they should not have based on their current role? We'll now have that information so that we can look at that and we can provide that information to the manager or throughout the organization and show that hierarchy with individuals within the different work groups that we have. What it actually all comes down to is Alteryx is the data portion of it, and of course Tableau is where we want to actually display what we're working on. So our job really is to find those anomalies and those patterns within our disparate sets of data and within the different areas of information security. All of that is really useless if we're not able to actually do something with that data. Data by itself is not inherently useful unless you can actually do something with it. So Tableau is where we tell our stories. So again, finding, communicating is great, but it doesn't really matter if you don't bring about change. And our current projects are to find and address risky user behavior. That is really where we're focused on right now. So this is your malicious insiders, your individuals who maybe don't know that they shouldn't be doing certain things. We're trying to bring visibility to that at this point. Let's talk about how we've done this. Right here is an example of the typical users within our organization, how they access or what areas of the internet they browse to, what things typically they're interested in, and where they're going to. On the right side is typically what you see for an individual who's more prone to get an infection. They spend more time on social networking. And obviously, a lot of information security people will tell you that the social networks are becoming the new way to really target people. It's easy. So we see that correlates. The individuals who don't spend a lot of time on social networking sites have a tendency to get infected significantly less. This one may be a little hard to decode initially, but what this is a breakdown of individuals within our organization who tend to upload data to code sharing sites for whatever reason. So what we wanted to do was bring visibility to their managers to let them know who the individuals are that are uploading data to these different sites, where they're going to, and how they rank among their peers. This basically allowed us to have a conversation with those managers to let them know that we maybe had some concerns about the amount of data that was going out to these different sites. It allowed us to frame that so that we could have not only a conversation with the managers, but maybe with their groups as well, and to try to understand why they were going to these sites and if there was a better alternative for them to use. What we wound up doing was actually turning off these sites, the ability to send information out to them. We still allow people to download because there are a lot of really good repositories of information out on these sites. But we don't necessarily want them to be posting intellectual property or things that could put our company at risk out on those sites, so we turned them off. What we wound up seeing was this. In the gray is pre-shutting off of those services. That's the amount of data that was going out on a daily basis. On the right side, in the orange, is when we turned it off. So there's a little arrow there that says that we turned it off at midday, I believe that is what we have there. So we all of a sudden saw a massive decrease in the data going out, which we would expect. It keeps our data a lot safer, having that capability to turn that off and to be able to track the amount of data that was going out pre and the amount of data that's going out post. Now, of course, we're still seeing data go out because, as you may well know, when you connect to a website, you're going to send information. It's a necessity. It's going to ask for information from you. You have to log in. You have to send query requests and all that. So there is the expectation that data will still go out, but the amount of data, of course, has decreased, and there is no possibility of individuals posting files out to those sites any longer. Another huge thing that we're working on right now is baselining our business. It is all irrelevant to basically find things if you can't tell if it's normal or not. So what we've done is put together dashboards that allow us to tell that story of this is what our company typically looks like. So in this case, this is internet usage across all of our organizations, across the different orgs that we have. The gray bars indicate the sites that people go to that are low risk or medium risk. The orange bars indicate areas where people are going to high-risk sites. Now, it may seem bad for one of these groups that they are significantly higher in the sites that they go to that are high risk. That's not actually true, and this is why it's important to baseline them. This particular organization deals with a lot of gambling sites and a lot of sites that use maybe our logos that are malicious. It's very important for them to hit these sites. So while this may look like it's super high, it's actually very important to their jobs to be able to look at those different areas of the internet. And we want to know that. We want to know that these people are hitting those sites. So maybe it's not so much that we would block it in this case, but we would keep an eye on that to make sure that there's not a lot of malicious stuff coming from those sites into our walls. This one is just kind of a fun, interesting one. So this is internet usage throughout the week, Sunday through Saturday. Sunday obviously is low. People come in on Monday and they spend a bit of time on the internet, and that tapers off as the week goes on. Friday drops off quite a bit, with Saturday, being very, very minimal. So we kind of see this beginning of the week, pinnacle, and then we kind of taper off as we go throughout the week on how people use the internet. This one actually shows us on the left side, the services or the systems that people access within the organization. What is typical? What's the typical number of disparate systems that people go to on a daily basis? So if we see a spike here, we might want to be concerned, because if we see somebody hitting a lot of different web servers or database servers that they don't normally log into, that may actually show us that they've been compromised and we need to take action. On the right side shows us where the majority of people spend their days on the internet. So obviously we have to use the internet. It's a very big, important part of most companies at this point. And so we like to know where they're going. So that graph lets us know. The bottom portion actually shows us people that are abnormally getting blocked logging into their systems or into their actual workstations. So we're able to monitor those the user base to look for these anomalies. And if we see a bunch of times where somebody has not been able to log in, they fail every time they hit a server, or across multiple servers they're getting rejected, that might indicate that their credentials have been compromised and someone's actually trying to use those credentials and their passwords incorrectly on the systems, and so that would throw up a red flag for us. Right here, this allows us to see where people VPN in from. So in this example, this actually shows us not necessarily if people are traveling, but just in general, do people VPN into our systems, and if so, from where? So if somebody were to come in from the middle of China or even Brazil, you actually would consider that to be a concern, because we don't necessarily have people that are in those locations, and it's out of the norm for somebody logging in. This allows us actually to look at travel. So we're able to see where people travel from, which is the blue portion of the line, to where they've gone to, the orange portion of the line, and how frequent travel is from one location to the other. So we're able to see if somebody logs in from, say, Sydney, and then goes to our Vilnius location, we're able to track that and see that that's normal. Now, if somebody were to say go from Sydney again to maybe Russia, and that's not the norm for our organization, we would have visibility to that. We also keep track of how quickly they travel from location to location. So if somebody travels from, say, Denver to Russia in 28 minutes, we know that that isn't possible, and that should obviously be a concern. And then finally, this is looking at people that work from home. Which organizations are more likely to versus which ones are not. This really isn't anything that we deal with a lot of risk on. This is just kind of interesting to see which organizations have more propensity to work from home versus in the office. Right here is looking at our virus count. So where are viruses detected within our organization, and what are they? It is actually true that viruses do happen. And so it's important to know what's normal and what's not. We do, of course, have some that come through our walls, and we know what the norm is for those. We can see that here. If we were to see something like ransomware come in that's out of this norm, then we know that that should be a higher concern than any of these items that we see on a regular basis. It really comes down to why we do what we do. I'd like to tell people that we're not analysts, we're storytellers. And the reason I say that is it's important to understand your data. It's more important to communicate it. That is number one. We want to be able to really identify, quantify, rank, and prioritize our risks, create risk profiles within our organization through the data. We're really looking for that bad or the questionable within our massive sea of good. The majority of our organization and of our agents are incredible. And when we see something that is out of the norm, we definitely want to bring that to light. That's important. We want to tell that story of the normal so that the abnormal becomes more apparent. And that's why we baseline. That's why that's so important. One of the things that we've noticed across the organization and in all of the work that we do is the people in similar roles are, well, they're typically similar. They access the same systems. They do the same things on a day in and day out basis. So that actually gives us a little baseline to be able to start looking at employees and see where we should be concerned and where we're not. All of this, of course, is based off of the predication that behavior and patterns are key to everything we do. If you don't have a pattern or a behavior that you can trend, that you can look at, those abnormals are kind of hard to detect. Once our data is really pulled together, we really do scour it to look for those outliers of the norm that we need to take action on or to bring to light within our organization. It's really not just bringing the data together. It's actually using that data and going through it to understand what is out of the norm. And one of the things that we notice is that malicious insiders, hackers, or even just negligent people, they give themselves away, but you have to know what you're listening for. And I think our tool set is really starting to move us in that direction to be able to take all of this data and really give that great listening post for people to go to determine what is out of the norm for our organization. And if you're anything like me, you're probably looking at this picture and wondering where Waldo is. Well, I'm going to kind of spoil that for you. He's right there. All right, Brian, why don't you take it away?
Erik, that is fascinating stuff. I love hearing you go through all this. And, it's just the baselining, it all makes so much sense. So really appreciate it. And I have a couple of things that I just wanted to chat with you a little bit about. Going back a little bit, you talked about delivering analytics in multiple ways. Can you talk a little bit more about that and ways that that's gotten easier for you and who some of those audiences are and what they're consuming?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, information security is a major customer of ours, and our sales and operations organizations. And for a lot of these, we're actually using Tableau to provide those visual interfaces for people and the interactives. So as an example, our risk profiles for our agents. However, we don't stop there. We do deliver reports to different organizations using the Alteryx server. We have different reports that we generate, PDF files that provide metrics, Excel reports that provide detailed lists of information. And we schedule that within the Alteryx server so that we don't necessarily have to be delivering reports and become a reporting function within the organization. We can let that stuff just happen behind the scenes. In addition to that, we work with the gallery to allow people to go ahead and pull their own information as well. It's one thing for us to deliver reports, and it's another for us to visualize it. It's a third thing to provide that self-service capability for people so that they can go and get the things that really matter to them.
That's great. Yeah, that's great that you're able to take the custom work out of that and make that just kind of an automated process that you don't think about. That's awesome. And then tell me a little bit about, how you got this going in terms of culturally and creating a culture of analytics. Was there resistance? Were there things that you needed to do or educate people on in order to kind of pave the way for what you've done here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. It's really easy to say that we need analytics. It's another to actually act upon that. I think the way that we kind of approached it was to really just make it happen, show people what can be done. It's again, it's something for me to say we need this. It's something for a vendor to come in and say you need this. When you can actually show the value of that information and present that to people and say this is how it affects you, that starts to allow you to have that conversation around why it's important. So what we did with ours to at least get this kicked off was we did the POC for the agents, and then we started delivering the reports to people who should be concerned and who can actually make a difference within our organization. And it became apparent that we hadn't had this information before. It's never come together. So it became easily consumable. It was something that people saw value in immediately. And that really led to our group, actually, our information security analytics group, coming to fruition. Once we had shown that there was value in looking at these risk aspects out there, it was then visible to our chief information security officer to basically say, you know what, we need to do this more. We need to really dive into these massive data sets that we've got, because it's one thing to be able to mitigate a risk. It's another to be able to, at a strategic level, be able to say, this is what's going on within our organization.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, for those of you who are listening, we've settled in on a slide here real quickly that gives you some next steps. If you're interested, you can download the Alteryx Starter Kit for Tableau, which includes a trial version of Alteryx, and you can get that at alteryx.com/Tableau Kit. So that's a nice way to get going and get some examples of Alteryx workflows and Tableau visualizations that go with them. Bill, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to you. I know there's probably a lot of questions out there, and we can start to address some of them with Erik.
Hey, Brian, Erik, thanks for that excellent presentation. So we'll get started with today's Q&A session. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a lot of questions that have come in, and we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. And so during this Q&A session, I'm going to leave this screen up. It has contact information for Brian and Erik if you'd like to contact them following today's webinar. So let's get started. Erik, relative to where you were when you started with Alteryx, have you seen a big change in the type of data you work with? And were there any particular types of data sources that were more challenging than others to build into the workflow?
Yeah, let's start off with the first portion of, are we seeing, a bunch of different data sources? Yeah, we are. We're branching out into multiple areas. One of the more interesting ones that we're diving into now is behavioral aspects of individuals within the organization, or really just putting a context around what they do on a day-to-day basis. That's kind of one of the major things that we're working on. We are going to be diving into servers and the risks that they have on them, and then categorizing them to provide the best visibility to what we should take action on up front versus what could actually wait. As far as the difficult data, we've had quite a few. Our log files are pretty difficult to work with in that they have so many different formats, and it's not necessarily intuitive at all. There are a lot of databases that we're running into now, especially when we're looking at entitlements, where there isn't necessarily a data dictionary or great understanding of what data actually is sitting in the tables on these different servers. So we're spending a lot of time having to understand what data is and make those translations when we pull from the source systems over into our data lakes. And actually, we use Alteryx for a lot of that. We'll translate things. We'll remove fields that are just extraneous that we don't really want to pull over into our data lake. So we do a lot of that cleanup right up front. And this entitlement stuff that I just mentioned, it's actually really difficult to pull together because you're dealing with data that doesn't necessarily line up the way you expect it to. So we're using Alteryx to do a lot of cleansing right up front, so that maybe when we have to dig real deep down, or somebody else has to consume that data, it's easy for them to understand. It's easy for me to explain to other people why we did the things we did, and how we intend to grow that data set even further.
Well, Erik, thanks for that answer. Yeah, there's never a replacement for good, solid data understanding. And as you talk about growing outward into more types of analytics, we did not talk about any of the predictive analytics capabilities that Alteryx brings. Are you using those, or are you doing your analytics strictly in Tableau and by Viz?
We do use the predictive a little bit. Not necessarily in the sense of being predictive, but in the sense to tell us what things we should be paying attention to versus what we actually are working with. What we found is that predictive is a little difficult to do in the cybersecurity world because it changes so quickly. An attack vector that you had yesterday may not be that relevant tomorrow. And so if you're constantly looking at your previous data to tell you what that path is going to look like, it may not be exactly what you're hoping for. So what we've gone with is really the outlier approach for the most part to look at what we've seen in the past and then just bring to light the things that we should be concerned with going forward.
Well, thanks. That's a very interesting insight into the analytics around cybersecurity. Earlier in your presentation, obviously you're a very experienced guy. You talked about it taking just 30 minutes for you to learn Alteryx. Is that what the typical user should experience, and how would you recommend that folks actually get started with Alteryx? Is it with videos, just playing around? Is there formal instruction? Can everybody get through it in 30 minutes like you did, or will it be a little more difficult?
Well, it's really going to depend on your technical prowess. I actually have been a programmer since I was about 10 years old, so things like that come really naturally to me. There is incredible documentation within Alteryx. There are examples for each of the tools. There's a little button that you can click, and it'll pull up an example for each of the tools that you're interested in. There are really good videos out there. There's a whole community of people to help you get through things and to figure items out. In fact, I was on the Alteryx community this morning because I had something that I couldn't figure out, and I actually found exactly what I was looking for to be able to use a REST API in some of the work that we're doing. So, there's a huge amount of documentation out there, and I tell you, the documentation that sits right within Alteryx is a great place to start, and it is amazing. And I think people can expect to have at least a good foundation to be able to start doing stuff, probably within an hour to two.
Really, that fast? Well, that's remarkable. Obviously, you've gotten more efficient as you have expanded your practice over time. Are there best practices that you can suggest about prototyping new workflows?
Yeah, there is actually. I think this is where the science portion of data science needs to take a step back. There is an artistic portion of this that we all know that exists there, even though we call it a science. The art of it really is to be able to take that blank canvas and think methodically about what you want to do. You don't necessarily have to do everything right off the bat. So you can start by maybe taking one of your data sources and parsing it out, getting it to where it needs to be, and then figuring out, okay, I now have this data set that I want to work with. What am I going to do with it? What is the ultimate outcome that I'm aiming for? So then you can start to bring in the additional data and start to blend it together and to start running the analytics, the predictives, and your formulas and all the other things to get you to that point. But I think it really comes from that artistic side of things to think about where that end game you kind of want to wind up at is, but in a way that you're not necessarily going to say this is absolutely the outcome I want. It's more of a I know where I want to get to, but I really need to to let the data guide me to some extent. It's kind of hard to explain, but it really is that artistic portion of it that needs to come to play when you're starting to build out a new workflow.
Oh, no, I understand completely that the business of iterating and trying things and until you get it right. But Brian, Erik, thank you for some great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you that asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all those unanswered questions to Brian and Erik and the Alteryx team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. Now, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for January 17th, that's our next Data Science Central webinar, which will be the science of color and visual design principles that Tableau will present. Also remember that today's taping is available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the home page of datasciencecentral.com in the webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions, and a special thanks for Alteryx for their sponsorship, and our speakers today, Brian Durking and Erik Miller, for their insight into today's topic. So my name is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on January 17th. Have a great day.